the Georgia Bulldogs bludgeon their way to back-to-back.
Saban with his third national championship in Alabama in 4 years.
For a while now, there's been a debate in college football on who's the best conference. And of course, lots of college football fans believe that whatever conference their favorite team is in is the best conference. And of course, this conversation has got even more heated with Michigan beating Alabama in the college football playoffs and then winning the national title. And this conversation will keep getting more heated as next season we will see conference realignment and some of these conferences are adding big time teams. But I'm here to prove why the SEC is the best conference in college football. And the first reason why I believe the SEC is the best conference in college football is recruiting. So to start this out, I made a list of how many total times a conference had teams landing in the top 10 of recruiting classes from 2010 to 2024. And the numbers are crazy, as 66 times were SEC teams ranked in the top 10 of recruiting classes. Big Ten had 21, 20 times for the Big 12, 18 times for the ACC, and 17 times for the Pac-12. And a lot of times it was 4 schools in the top 10 for the SEC, while the Big 10 and Big 12 most of the time had 2 schools, maybe occasionally 3 schools. And the ACC would usually have 1 school, maybe 2, and the Pac-12 would have 1 school. And to further prove that the SEC recruiting is better, we can look at 247's blue chip ratio. And the blue chip ratio is just a percentage of how many blue chip recruits are on a team. And usually, these blue chip recruits are 4 stars and 5 stars. And to no surprise, the blue chip ratio last year was dominated by the SEC, as the SEC had 6 teams entering the 2023-2024 season on a blue chip ratio chart. And if that isn't good enough, we can look at the 2014 season through the 2022 season. And I got this list from a Reddit user, and it shows that, the SEC still dominated from those years as well. So as we can see, the SEC is the best conference when it comes to recruiting. Now that we're off recruiting, I want to talk about players getting drafted, as the SEC has the most first round picks produced by any conference in the NFL draft, with that number sitting at 209, which is 80 more than the next conference, and that's the Big Ten at 129. And of course, the SEC school with the most first round picks is of course Alabama with 46. Then you got Georgia, Florida, and LSU in the top 10 for most first round picks as well. And not only does the SEC have the most first round picks, but they also have the most players on active NFL rosters. As right now, the SEC has 367 players on the active NFL rosters. And of course, the Big Ten is next up with 288 active NFL players. And Alabama and Georgia are 1 and 2 when it comes to producing NFL players, as Alabama has produced 57 and Georgia has produced 49. And actually, Georgia has produced the most NFL players in a single draft, with that being at 15. And Alabama and Miami are tied for the most players picked in the first round by any team, with both having 6 first round draft picks in a single year. And now that we're off producing NFL talent, let's jump to winning. And we all know winning is the most important thing in sports. And we all know the SEC does it the best when it comes to college football. The SEC has won 13 of the last 17 national championship games. And the SEC has appeared in 15 of the last 17 national championship games, with the 2 years that they didn't appear in the national championship game coming in 2014, where Ohio State versus Oregon played against each other, which was the first college football playoff national championship game. Then you had just this past year between Michigan and Washington. And out of those 17 national championship games and the 15 that the SEC appeared in, the SEC won 13 of those games. And 6 of those championships came from Alabama, including the back-to-back championships they won in 2011 and 2012. Then you had Georgia going back-to-back in 2021 and 2022. Florida and LSU also won 2, and then you had Auburn winning 1 with Cam Newton in 2011. There was also a time period between 2006 and 2012 where the SEC won every national title.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6.
And that's not even the craziest thing. Let's take a look in between the years of 2006 and 2022. In between those years, we had 2 teams from the SEC play each other for the national championship 3 different times. The first time happening in 2011, where you had Alabama versus LSU. Then you had 2018, where you had Alabama versus Georgia, and 2021, where you had Alabama versus Georgia. Also, the SEC is the only conference to have 2 teams featured in the college football playoff, not once, but twice. And those years came in 2018, where you had Alabama and Georgia in the college football playoffs, and 2021, where you had Alabama and Georgia again in the college football playoffs. And that's not a regular thing in the college football playoffs, as it's only one conference to do that one time outside the SEC, and that's the Big Ten. And those 2 teams were in 2022 with Michigan and Ohio State, as the ACC, Big 12, and Pac-12 have only got 1 team in at a time. And all those conferences outside the SEC have struggled to get a variety of different teams in. And we don't even just got to look at the BCS and College Football Playoff National Championship game wins. We can look at how many wins the SEC got against other conferences. So let's take a look at the overall record against each conference since 2007. And since then, the SEC has 217 total wins against every conference, and they have 153 losses against every conference since 2007. Now, I do want to be fair and say that every year in between 2007 and 2023, the SEC didn't have a winning record. In 2016, the SEC had a non-conference record of 11-14 against non-conference teams, or in 2017, where they had a 10-12 record against non-conference teams. You also got this past season where they went 12-13 in a non-conference schedule. You also got years like 2008 and 2014 where they went 11-10 in the non-conference games. So every year between 2007 and 2023 wasn't just peaches and cream for the non-conference schedule. But I also want to look at games between those years as well. We can look at the 2015 Cotton Bowl where Bama shut out Michigan State in the college football playoffs, or the 2021 Orange Bowl where Georgia blew out Michigan. You also got that Alabama versus Michigan bowl game in 2019 where Alabama blew them out. Oh, and how could we forget the Alabama USC game that opened up the season in, I believe, 2017. Now, since we talked about winning, let's talk about money. And we all heard the phrase, money make the world go round, and that's true. And right now, money is the most important thing in college football, and really it always has been. Especially in this world of NIL, where now it's legal to pay players. And in 2023, SEC had a couple of teams in the top 10 for revenue in college football, with Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, and Texas A&M all cracking the top 10. And I also don't want to leave out LSU, who also cracked the top 10 as well. The Big Ten only had 2 teams, that being Ohio State and Michigan, and the Big 12 had 2 teams as well, having Texas and Oklahoma. But of course, those 2 teams are going to go over to the SEC, so the SEC is even going to gain more in 2024. While the ACC and the Pac-12 didn't even have top 10 teams on this list. So the SEC is clearly the dominant college football conference when it comes to getting revenue. But it makes sense as the SEC, most teams are down south, and we all know football down south is just more important than it is any other place in America. But the money is so important because lots of these teams are going to have lots of NIL money to toss at these recruits. So they'll be able to get the best of the best players in the recruiting classes. Now, of course, teams like Clemson, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, and the other teams will be able to get top recruits as well. But of course, in the top 10 of the recruiting rankings, you will still see lots of SEC teams dominating. Now, I would mention the atmosphere around the SEC football compared to other conferences, but I've only been to Big Ten games and I can only speak on their atmosphere. But I would like to think what I've watched on TV and on YouTube that the SEC has a better atmosphere than, well, every conference in college football. Now, in this video, am I saying that the SEC is head and shoulders above every conference in college football? No. But do I think they're the best conference in college football? Yes. And if you believe or don't believe so, comment down below. And I appreciate y'all watching. Thank you. Until next time, I'm out.